Hackers. Hackers are everywhere. Heroes or zeros? Is our dear hacker the freedom fighter of the 21st century? Or are they information anarchists with which we must eradicate them from the face of the earth? It's a tough call, because in some ways they're a little bit of both. What is a hacker? Well, if we wanted to understand what a hacker is, we might go to a dictionary. For the younger members of the audience, these are books on paper. Turn the page, you'd read it. Hacker. Hacker. Noun. A person that cuts roughly. Doesn't really help us. Second definition. A person who uses computers to gain unauthorized access to data, or informal, an enthusiastic and skillful computer programmer. Okay, so it turns out you can see inside there's a little bit of a divergence of what a hacker might be. A lot of people in the popular imagination remembers hackers from the 1980s of the movie War Games, and with the cute little Matthew Broderick is changing the grades of one of his classmates from a C to a B, and she gets upset and says, no, you gotta change it back. Okay, you might now, today, we use the term hacker, and we're a little bit uneasy with that because it sort of seems like these are, nefarious people bent on doing terrible harm. The truth is that the term hacker has changed over time. In the 1950s, it was used in the community of electrical engineers and technical people, and eventually in the computer sciences, to mean someone who's laboring intently, working intently at a problem. And only in the 70s it changed to mean digital trespass. So we have to remember first that some sort of hacking, if you will, is kind of useful. So there's something called the white hat hacker, and the white hat hacker is like in the Cowboys and Indians. You could always tell the good guys from the bad guys because the bad guys wore black hats and the good guys wore white hats. So the white hat hacker is the person who does good things, all right? And the second area where hacking is useful is what we call red teams. When you red team something, it's a noun. It's a verb. It's a noun as well. It's a verb. To red team something means that you deliberately have someone in an organization try to attack something to see what the holes are and try to improve it. So it comes from a military terminology in which you have the blue team versus the red team. The blue team is always your team, and the red team is always the adversary. Okay? And so the red teams will go and you'll hire hackers or people internally to try to break the defenses of your own system. And the third and final way in which hacking is useful is this idea of freedom to tinker. That you can actually have people who would like to just experiment and with curiosity try to play around and see what they can do with things. And by doing so, they stretch the state of the art. This is an electrical diagram. Does anyone know what it is an electrical diagram of? It is a nuclear power plant. I found this online. Okay, fear, okay. So it turns out that hackers could be, under this idea, interpreted as the 21st century freedom fighters, that they are like the revolutionaries, the great Americans who overthrew the British. No, they're not like that at all. They're like the French revolutionaries who overthrew the monarchy. They're the freedom fighters. And so we have to respect that, except that hacking also has problems. There is a problem with hacking, and that is now criminals, really serious criminals, have gotten involved, a little bit like the mafia, the sort of people who would break your legs if you have a debt. They too now are going online, and their crime now is through computer networks, and it's a problem. The second thing is that countries have become criminal in this respect as well, and they're hacking everyone and everything, and that has a lot of serious consequences to global peace and security. Recently, just last year, the United States government, a really small department of the government, uncovered that they were the victim of an incredible hack. And they hadn't known it until June of 2015. The small little part of government was called the Office of Personnel Management. What do? They're the HR department of the federal government. Basically, every single national government employee of the United States goes through this system to get paid and to get its benefits, but also, in some instances, to get approved for certain classifications of their job. Okay, so how did it affect? It affected 21 million people, including not just the people who are maybe applying for the jobs, but the friends and the relatives who are interviewed to see if this person, say a scientist at a nuclear lab, should be eligible. If the person, when during that discussion, they would ask, is there any information that could be used by a foreign power or a criminal gang to blackmail that person? Please let us know. And so these people wouldn't be disqualifying for the job if you're a nuclear scientist, but it might actually affect how they treated you because you needed to know that this was a potentiality. It was all disclosed. And so now someone has this. In fact, it might be China, it might be Russia, it might be someone else, it might be Canada, it might be Britain. Someone has this information, and this is a terrible thing, 6 million fingerprints. So these are real serious problems. Individuals can be hackers as well. We've seen this recently in a lot of high-profile cases. Who's this? Everybody knows Edward Snowden, that's right. Who's this? Julian Assange of WikiLeaks. Who's this? Right, trick question, Bradley Manning, Chelsea Manning, right, exactly. But Manning, right? Person who's hackers, who's this? Aaron Swartz, well done, Aaron Swartz. So it turns out we've had some of these high-profile hackers, but by talking about hacking, well, what were these guys doing as individuals? It's a little bit different. They're not the criminals, and they're not countries, and they're not sort of breaking into systems, although they did a little bit of that. They're after information, okay? But not just any kind of information. They believed in open information, and we should like open information. I'm a journalist, so I should like information because open information is good. The more information we have, the better things are. That's good. The problem with this is that sometimes a little bit too much information can be a bad thing, okay? So in the case of Julian Assange, who runs WikiLeaks, he has an open platform for people to disclose absolutely anything. In the case of Manning, when he was a private first class in the army, he took a lot of diplomatic cables that were not really talking about criminal behavior, but about how the world works in terms of how the State Department would use a foreign leader like Lee Kuan Yew to negotiate with the North Koreans over nuclear security. And the person played a very tough diplomatic game, but this was now open in the air, and so the world was a little bit less safe because of it. In the case of Edward Snowden, he was disclosing information, not through WikiLeaks, in which it all went out everywhere. He was putting out information about what he perceived as wrongdoing by the National Security Agency, illegal surveillance activities, and he went through the journalists who would exercise some sort of editorial control. In the case of Aaron Swartz, he just really believed that a lot of information, academic papers, should be made free and more accessible because copyright was too onerous. I think a lot of people would respect that, right? And certainly want to mitigate the sort of penalty he would fear, he would face. So we understand that open information can be a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing. Sometimes it can be a really dangerous thing. It can be terrible. Think about the US election that just took place. In US politics, we've seen instances of hacking just recently in the last few months. The emails of Hillary Clinton, her aide, John Podesta, and the Democratic National Party, right, was totally hacked into, and all of this information was made available. And if you go up to WikiLeaks, you could do a search for it. You could look for information about when they talk about The Economist, they talk about ThinkNation. Full disclosure, it's not this ThinkNation. It's just the incidence of the word in ThinkNation, but you can all do this. And you could say maybe there's a privacy problem here, a little bit too much information. But what if it wasn't just politics that were being hacked, if you will, but the election itself through the voting machines? What then? Well, would democracy have any integrity if we didn't actually really know if the vote was true or not because the machines themselves were connected and wired and therefore they were hacked? Well, what is the solution to this problem? It's easy. There is no solution. Okay, a little bit more than that. It turns out that there might be no solution to the problem. This is something we're just going to have to live with, that hackers are going to be around just as there's criminals around and there's constables to try to help us alleviate the problems of the bad guys. But we can understand that there would be some ways that we can improve the situation just a little bit around the margins. And so the first thing is using the law. And the law just has to distinguish between the good and the bad types of hacking, the freedom to tinker, or the experimentation and the curiosity, or the disclosure of problems versus people who are criminals and nefarious. In the case of Aaron Swartz's case, terribly, there was a prosecutor who was working with abandon to put the kid behind jail, and the stress actually forced him to commit suicide. So these have real serious consequences. Second thing we'd want to do is have the audibility of the technical systems. we can't actually have any integrity in democracy and in elections unless we audit the vote to make sure that the electronic voting system hasn't been tampered with. So we need to go to the paper ballot and see that it matches together. That should be basic. The third thing that we could do is have real protections for whistleblowers. Now, you talk to people in power, like they say, oh yeah, we've got all these protections. It's not true. They make a mockery of common sense. These protections don't exist in practice, and so they absolutely need to. And then the fourth thing that we can do is simply win the cat and mouse game. We have to accept the fact that it's a game. We have to accept the fact that it's going to always be a balance of power. And we need to do the very best thing that we can to see that we put enough resources to win that game. And if we do, if we adopt those four very basic improvements to it, I think that we're never going to get rid of hacking, the bad parts of hacking, but we'll be able to preserve the good parts and also do some benefits for the bad parts. Thanks a lot.